all our panels since yesterday and this morning, right? Like since pretty much everything had a cyber angle to it. But now we are kind of going to have a discussion focused on cyber and where it's going and what opportunities are there in front of us. So with that, let me invite the moderator for the panel, Alan from Sahouri, and I'll have him go ahead and invite the panelists.
Let's go. Oh yeah, check, check, check. All right, this is gonna be fun. Everyone still awake? I need post-lunch, I'm a little worried. We have a panel that makes me feel this big, I'll be honest. First of all, I'm Alan Hudson. I'm the Director of Property and Casualty with Sahouri Insurance and Financial, 51 years in business. Specialize in pretty much all lines of coverage, but the last 10 years we've focused on developing niche market products. And a product we're really proud of is a cyber liability product designed specifically for Indus entrepreneurs. No, that last part's a joke. But it's a really good cyber product for government contractors specifically. Yeah, so without further ado, because I know we're on a time crunch, Carlos, could you come on up here? Carlos is the Chief Information Technology Security Officer for the Executive Office of the Director at the National Institutes of Health. 26 years of basically keeping our most precious and valuable information safe. Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, have a seat, please. Next panelist is Ms. Mollie Breen. Thank you for coming. She's the founder and CEO of Perygee, a cybersecurity company reimagining how operational technology and security practices can work better together. I'm going to give you a little more about her bio because it just sounds like something from like Rainbow Six or like Tom Clancy type of. So yes, before Perygee, she was the Vulnerability and Network Exploitation Analyst at the NSA. She is a Harvard MBA, Master's in Engineering as well from Harvard, and a Mathematics and Computer Science degree from Duke University, among 2 more pages of very impressive things. Yes, and I'm going to have some fun with them, right? Because I don't know half the acronyms and terminology they do. Or maybe they're going to have fun with me, I think. We'll see. All right. And last but not least, Shri, can you come on up here? This guy is another very decorated veteran of the cyber security world, if you will. In our sort of panel planning meetings, half of which I can't actually talk about, or I'd have to kill you. Some of the conversations we had about the gray areas between white and black hat is just fascinating stuff. So anyway, I'm sure you all want to get into it, right? Thank you all for being, oh, by the way, great job, huh? A lot of you are probably wondering, well, Sahouri, what did you join, And no, it's not because the head of our tech department, who we just hired and brought over from the UK, Mahesh Hegde, happens to be South Asian. Nothing to do with that at all. Really, it's all about our cyber product specifically designed for Indus Enterprise, right? No. Is it just me, or is it weird talking with clothes on below your waist? No? Just me. All right, let's get to it, huh? All right. So, Carlos, yeah. As the head of the executive office, how many NIH divisions do you sort of have to?
So there are 19 program areas operating under the executive office. So if you're not familiar with NIH, it's comprised of 27 different institutes and the Office of the Director, which is kind of the policy setting organization for all of NIH. So.
A bit like herding cats, I suppose.
Pretty much.
So how do you plan on, or what are you doing now to ensure that you're able to share information with other agencies and departments safely?
It's an interesting question, pretty timely, because one of the challenges that we've had is obviously in terms of sharing information, it's easy to share information.
Sure.
It's hard to share information securely. And that's one of the challenges. We have a lot of collaborators that either support specific services that are either provided by or public facing that NIH provides to citizens, right? We have a lot of universities that support some of our business processes, some of our research, some of the scientists themselves. So having a mechanism, or secure mechanism rather, let's preface that.
Wait, it's not as easy as all the people yesterday were talking about? Why can't we all just give everyone information, right?
Yeah, so you have a number of facets that you need to consider. Number one, who you're sharing information with, right? So you're talking about authenticity of the person or organization or entity that you're driving data, you're driving traffic from and to and from. You have the access mechanisms. How are we going to get access to the data? How are we going to grant access to the data? How are we going to gather data? So in terms of the challenges, I think within the government space, it's much easier to secure the internal ecosystem. When you start opening up your borders, right, and you think about like zero trust and microsegmentation, which by the way are not novel, it makes the process of securing these entities, whether it's data information systems, a little bit more complex. And with complexity, it tends to breed, in certain cases, insecurity. So what we're doing, I think, in terms of a holistic process within NIH across all of the ISCs is coming up with a framework to, number one, shore up identity. So implementing two-factor authentication for any type of outward-facing services that are leveraged either by citizens or by researchers or by collaborators. Ensuring that there's some level of, I guess, authenticity in terms of assuring that you are who you are when you are leveraging services or doing business with NIH. So those are two areas that I think in and of itself are very complex, very challenging, but it's something that's certainly on the roadmap within this coming quarters. So, yep.
Okay. Well, and we'll don't worry, I'm going to ask them what's in it for us, right? Yeah. That's coming. But the opportunity really, both on the agency and as a partner on the partner side. Mollie, great question for you. I looked at the website. I mean, a platform for organizational security, fascinating. Short of actually utilizing your product, are there any products or resources available to the private sector to enhance their security? Beyond two-factor authentication. I mean, like actual systems or programs that people can use to shore up their security.
It's a complex question because I think it really depends on what stage the company is in, like how big is it, what's the context it's in, what industry is it. So if I go back to your question, which is what tools are available to private sector today, I would dig a little deeper and ask yourself, am I a large enterprise trying to see across a lot of different information silos? Am I a smaller company with limited resources? I know you were mitigating two-factor authentication. I think two-factor authentication is one of the best things you can do. And it's funny that it's something that, as Carlos mentioned, some of these things aren't new, and yet 20 years later, we're all still not doing them. We all still are reusing passwords. So, take a step back. There's certainly tools we can be putting in place that are just getting at the best practices, the fundamentals for any business, large and small. And then as you grow and as you become larger businesses, the tools that are available, I see companies adopting one of two different types of approaches. They're either thinking along the lines of, do I want a best of breed tool for every different part of the network stack? Meaning, I want the best firewall, I want the best NAC solution, which is the network access controls. Or they're thinking along the lines of, do I want one solution, vendor generalness? Carlos is nodding. He's probably had to face decisions like this in the past. And it goes back to what are your goals as an organization? What are your resources? And And usually it's a hybrid approach. So in the hospital sector, where there are certain threats that they might be more worried about that are different from the oil and gas, they might take a more generalized approach to certain areas and a more best of breed approach to certain tools. So it goes all the way back to like, what is the why, what are you solving for, and then you can use certain frameworks and principles when deciding between different types of solutions.
Yeah, very good. Well, that question is going to come up again in the discussion about, what we anticipate the government's expectations of us will be at some point, and whether that becomes a private motivated or public. Anyway, Sri, this is fascinating stuff. Thank you, Mollie. Big gray area in cybersecurity that can't be reproduced. We do insurance, and if there's a fire, like you feel like if I'm the manufacturer of a big safe, right, and it's flawless, right? It's impenetrable. I can't exactly hire people to strap dynamite to it and blow it up and drag it behind their car and basically, vulnerability test it the way you can with hackathons and ways, digitally, which creates this gray area. I mean, being a good guy or a bad guy depends a lot on the perspective, doesn't it? And this is more like sort of one of those hacker questions, if you will. But I feel like you need to know your opponent.
I mean, it's absolutely, it's a very, very interesting question, right? I mean, every sector in manufacturing, you go through a certification process. You see UL, right? Underwriting lab certifying pretty much everything from your sensor to a thermostat. Whereas in software, you allow people to self-certify. I mean, you're basically trusting Microsoft to build software and say it's safe. And every single time, every patch Tuesday comes, they say, ouch, we missed this. And we accept that fact, by the way, right? I mean, it's a constant brawl between a CIO and folks like Carlos are like, guys, you got to go patch. Like, why? I mean, that's a constant question, whether you're small, big, large, complex. So one of the interesting things you'll see in the last 3 years is software bill of materials. There's a lot of emphasis on, are we using the right materials, right? In this case, the code. And while we started looking at what we're using to build software, we're starting to go to a complete new notion of no code to less code, which means you're taking tons of black boxes and assembling software and releasing it, and you don't even know what the black box is. Suddenly your problem just quadrupled, and now you have open source coming into commercial closed source, and components that are built for a certain function being reused without knowing what they're doing. And the complexity is going on and on and on. And the interesting piece is when you sign off on your EULAs, the end user agreements, the vendor clearly writes, I'm not liable for any harm of the software. And we're gladly signing those agreements across, by the way, federal government down. For the first year, I think the federal government this year said, we're going to hold the private companies accountable. But again, that's not a legislation, it's just a procurement thing they're talking about, we're going to hold you accountable. I mean, unless the goodness did not work, companies producing secure code voluntarily is not working, I think the government is going to enforce legislation. And we are heading down that path, right? We're starting with CMMC on a supply chain. We're starting to say, okay, we won't give you the contracts if you don't produce secure core. And I think the Senate just started talking about we're going to hold you liable if ever you get breached, because SolarWinds was a wake-up call, right? So there are a lot of things happening now. I think we're heading towards a very interesting legislative mandate that you got to build secure code.
Well, I was on the NIST IT lab website this morning, poking around. It's just what I do sometimes. And they've got a lot of proposed standards. I mean, fresh, like created in October, that they're rolling out, and they're in the input, I guess, phase of this. So, I guess that's my first sort of broad question is, as a government contractor, and with foresight, our hindsight being 2020, like what can I do now to prepare for what seems to be the inevitable, as far as requirements and legislation coming in.
I mean, I can take it, or Carlos can take it.
CMM certification.
I mean, CMMC
liability.
is just the beginning, right? It's cyber hygiene. There's nothing new. Actually, there's nothing new in CMMC if you look at it. I mean, we started with the NIST cybersecurity framework from an overarching framework perspective. CMMC still talks about, how can you really make sure you have proper hygiene and you measure it. But the question you're asking about is even broader. When you talk about software development, I mean, Carnegie Mellon, in partnership with NIST and DHS, has done an amazing job over the last 10 plus years on secure coding. Today, that's a common class that's been taught across the United States for all national centers of academic excellence, right? The government publishes top 25 programming errors. There's a lot going on, WASP top 10. There's much more awareness today. When you write code, ensure your folks are trained on secure practices. Start with the training. I mean, you talked about tech. It's people, process, and tech. I mean, we all are good at PowerPoints, right? Let's remember the PowerPoint, people, process, technology. Invest in your people so they understand. When you're given a computer and a keyboard to write code, take the responsibility and pride in what you're writing. Just don't get on and code. The next thing is process. When I'm writing code, do I have enough checks and balances? As I commit code, am I looking for weaknesses? As I build, am I looking for weaknesses? What gates are there? I mean, that's where the developers and security are converging now. And there are a lot of tools that allow you to detect extreme left rather than waiting till the code is deployed. So there are good processes in place. And tech, there are dime a dozen application security tools today, right from your compiler to the day you commit your code. So you have multiple ways to actually measure your security of your code itself.
By the way, Dr. Shri, I didn't get a chance to mention, was an instrumental part of the White House's incorporation of threat assessment, right? And so he was the guy that was basically brought on to try to poke holes in their security. Pretty
It's a huge team. I'm just one of the piece in the pod.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to address
The
one of the
original.
points that you made about secure coding. It still goes back to the fundamentals, right? OWASP Top 10 has been around for quite some time now, right?
Absolutely.
But there's an opposing force to even fulfilling that need of committing to the fundamentals, and that is that we are, in terms of productivity, trying to do so much with very little time. And there's this pressure on developers to get product out, both on the commercial side and the government side. And there has to be a balance, and like you said, embedding those security principles, whether it's using static code analysis or some other mechanism for building in security in the development process. It goes back to the fundamentals. We're not doing it. We're not doing it well. Let's put it that way. So, as with all things, I love innovation, but with innovation, we certainly have to still think about the basics.
No, absolutely, Carlos. The journey has just begun, right? The last 2 years have been very interesting for multiple reasons. I mean, we started with what we call shift right. I mean, we deploy code, we test it after the fact. I mean, it's like fixing a plane mid-flight, right? That's what we used to. I mean, most security is an afterthought. I mean, the last couple of years was a wake-up call.
Thank you for the layman analogy, by the way.
No, I mean, that's the shift right method, right? I mean, it's a functioning system. I can't go patch it. I mean, it's a friction. I don't know what I'll break. I don't have access to the code. I mean, a lot of complexities that go in when you go to the extreme right. Yeah. Now, what we are saying is, well, we need to ship code, but can we do something in a more reasonable way? That's where the prioritization comes into play. That's where the attacker's mentality comes into play. If I don't fix it, what would an attacker do? That's the first question you started, Alan. I mean, how do you think like a bad guy? Mm-hmm. So once you have that perspective, then you will respect that I want to go fix it. But you got to ingrain that.
I'd love to add on this. I think there's a subtext to what we're talking about where we're describing a process where let's bring security forward in the development process. but I don't think we should ignore the maintenance part either, and the reevaluation, the fact that this space is constantly changing. You brought up no code, like in some of these newer security tools, and we use no code in our security tools, and one of the things that we're solving for is, there could be bugs in our system, but there can also be bugs in the script that a developer writes internally in an organization, and what the decision that the CISO or whoever is buying the product is making is, but in the scenario with this product with no code inside of the platform, there's a maintenance aspect to it. Someone will continually look and see if that is going to be vulnerable or not. Whereas the script that might live on the shelf and be super helpful and precise in an enterprise may never get checked, and someone might not, and it might not be well documented. So it's an example to going back to this larger conversation around secure code and thinking about it needs to be a part of the entire life cycle, both the beginning, the middle, the deployment process, and then also the end, but there is no end. These things will continue to live on.
Well, I do want to make sure I get to the broader question, because I've got a lot of questions I want to ask, but most importantly is, where's the opportunity in the future? In other words, looking out a year or two from now, a lot of the panelists mentioned yesterday, zero trust or the data mesh development. What do you see in terms of the need for not just the agency level, but on the private side for cybersecurity in a year or two from now?
Well, I'll ask this. Let me pose a quick question to the audience. By show of hands, who's familiar with Executive Order 14028? So
I'm just kidding.
I'm going to say about
Definitely not.
1/10 of the audience. And it's an important executive order because it espouses securing the nation's cybersecurity, right? So if you want to talk about opportunity, you certainly have to have or know what's going on in terms of the federal government and what they're looking to espouse enhancements in cyber, and shoring up cyber, ensuring that we're applying proper risk management. So we talked about zero trust. What is zero trust? If you think about some of the lineage that the framework of zero trust espouses, for like Mollie, who's been in the TS world and has familiar with SCIFs and SCI programs and mandatory access controls, a lot of those principles are from zero trust, are derived in that world, right? So you're talking about microsegmentation and ensuring security of specific data sets for specific people, specific times, specific processes. Those are things that we are continuing to reinvent and innovate and then apply in a broader realm within the cyberspace. So as businesses, or whether a small business or a medium business, taking those concepts and developing processes, not just technology, but business processes, developing people, retooling your approach to how you can support the government in implementing these new frameworks, and ensuring that we're, number one, leveraging our existing tools to the best to our capacity, but then of course showing us a path forward for reinventing how we approach cyber. So again, holistically, but I'm sure my colleagues have some other comments.
It sounds to me like there is a lot of opportunity.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
in terms of dollars spent, it's going to be heavy cybersecurity. Mollie, any thoughts?
I'll first say I did not realize that the zero trust came from some of the principles within the NSA. Like the fact that I was authenticating myself through like 4 different doors
There you go.
could be directly related to zero trust. I guess going back to this executive order and how it's getting at critical infrastructure today within the U.S. needs to be strengthened. I think some of the opportunities that exist is how critical infrastructure is going to be more than just the way that we think about, like today when we think critical infrastructure, we think oil and gas, the power grid, the water supply, municipalities. And I think that we're more and more going to rely on digital technology and think of it as critical infrastructure. Like Amazon today, I don't think anybody might think of it as critical infrastructure, but it really is like the way that we expect to get our goods. And we saw firsthand in the pandemic how things started to break down that we didn't even realize we relied on. And that in some way is the definition of critical and what we would need in a time of crisis. And I think over these next, maybe not 1 to 2 years, maybe we're thinking a little further out, but the definition of critical infrastructure will continue to expand. And so this executive order is going to have an even broader scope and not just be in the sort of heavy utility industries, but we might even see it applying to places like retail that typically we might not have put in the original definition.
That's a great thought. I mean, you saw what the stock market did when Facebook went out for like an hour. I mean, it's a tangled web we weave. Sri, any thoughts?
I mean, there's a ton of opportunity, right? Cyber just started. If you look at the investment world, I mean, that's one of the hottest, other than fintech and blockchain and, you know, your bitcoins, cryptocurrencies. I mean, cyber is the hottest, right? I mean, if you can get an ARR or whatever, you get 20x to 50x to 60x. CrowdStrike is valued 60 times multiple. They're not profitable. So if you're an entrepreneur, right? I mean, of course, I mean, they're on a great mission, right, to prevent breaches. Yeah. So there are tons of problems in cybersecurity. And then one of the topics we had on the panel was Mollie and Carlos were talking about, do I pick a vendor where there is convergence, or do I pick best of breed? So the challenge what's happening in cybersecurity is we're a fragmented mess. I mean, that's a simplistic way of telling. Everybody has the best solution. Nobody can solve beyond what they built. There's good news to it. I mean, if you can find 10 design partners, Palo Alto is willing to give you 20x. They brought Bridge Crew for $190 million on a $2 million revenue. It's infrastructure as code. I mean, Tenable, which is located here, bought Accurus for $160 million, about $2.5 million in revenue. So if you can solve a problem and get 10, 20 design partners and deploy it on 10,000 customers, an opportunity to deploy, you don't have to even deploy. Show the thesis, there's tremendous opportunity. There's not one.
Michael, I quit.
So, and then if you look
Tell
at
me
the
more.
executive order, there are some amazing opportunities where very specific problem statements are mentioned. That's what you should look for, right? I mean, as entrepreneurs, what do you look for? I mean, I always say this. This is what I told myself when I came out of the government. I don't want to build vitamins. Vitamins are a luxury. If I don't take a vitamin, I don't die. I can sleep well. If I'm in pain, without a pain medication, I can't sleep. That's why ibuprofen is a lot more resourceful and valuable for pharma companies than making a B12 or a D3. Think about that in a very simple way. Cybersecurity should solve a real pain, not a vitamin. And identify the pain that's across the board. And that's a great way to do it. And then start looking at execute orders because you have a tailwind. The government is willing to spend billions of dollars. It's 80-20 rule. Still today, 80% of the cyber spend is coming from the United States. And when you start looking at who in the United States is actually spending, the government spends predominantly the most cyber dollars still in the US, not private sector. I mean, these are all simple facts.
Yeah, and it's important to note that, you know, in terms of the federal government outside of DoD for civil agencies, that the vast majority of cyber practitioners are coming from contracting entities. These are small and medium businesses like, you know, AZ Cyber, Unisant that are doing the things that are necessary for us to focus on the business rather than security. And we need those businesses to help us to drive innovation internally so that we can focus on the core aspects of what the agency exists for, right? So for NIH, our focus is on research and the health of the Americans, the nation. We don't want to have to worry about security, although we have to worry about security. So we rely on contracting companies for the most part. I mean, for my team, I'm at, for every one Fed, we have about 5 contractors. It sounds like a lot, but you know, it's a complex environment. We have different risk profiles across the 27 institutes. You know, some are focused on patient care, while others are focused on financial data and research. So it's a very diverse environment. And with that, we need diverse perspectives from the business world to address some of the challenges that we face.
That was a lot of alpha.
Yeah.
That's a finance term for value. It's a handsome panel, isn't it? It's a nice shot. Videography. Thank you back there. All right, so I'm going to simplify it a little bit. What do we do as an organization when we get hacked?
Oh.
Right? That's a pretty fun one because
Just pray to God.
yeah,
It should not have happened.
much it. And just tell all your clients and have them
Oh,
hope they don't panic.
You know,
Oh, we are sorry.
Yeah, right.
What else would you say?
That's about it, I guess. But
you know, it's funny for me.
does it depend on what is hacked, or I mean, is it just because I know, like in the insurance world, we spend a lot of money notifying your clients when you get hacked.
It's been an evolution for me. I think that, you know, over 26 years ago, I was a
He
security.
like it happens to him every
No,
day. It's like, oh, I got another hack. All right.
I was a security evangelist. Like, it's like secure everything. Forget about usability. Forget about the business. Like, if you can't access it, that's great. And now, you know, obviously the evolution and wisdom and learning from my peers and colleagues and just different industries, that has changed, right?
A little bit.
Breaches are inevitable. I'm sorry. It's going to happen. And for me, the question is, how fast can you recover? How fast can you get your business back to doing the thing that is necessary to support what the business is responsible for? I'll just leave it at that in a nutshell because I don't want to keep chatting.
Sounds like a fun.
No, I mean, I think
Take it
believe
back
in
to
3 R's, right? First, strive for resilience. That's what everybody wants. And Carlos is spot on. When a breach happens, a lot of people are completely confused. Where do I even start? Start with your recovery. Every response should have recovery as a priority. I mean, people will come and say, we're going to start forensics, do this, do that. While forensics is important, recovery is more important. And especially in the world of ransomware, that becomes more important. And the third R is remediation. Every breach has a long tail of remediation because you'll constantly be finding things. Use that as an opportunity to actually advance your cybersecurity strategy. Once you're hit, use that as a real opportunity to tell your customers, your stakeholders, and your management how important this opportunity is for you to transform. A lot of people take a breach as a negative thing. It's a real positive, actually. If you do it right, it's a real positive. Look at FireEye. Look at SolarWinds. 2 examples, exactly month after month. FireEye used that as an opportunity to advance and strengthen their place in the market by being transparent, by talking about lessons learned, by educating the market, how they responded, and how they recovered, and how they mitigated. On the other hand, SolarWinds sat on it for 90 days, not talking about it, trying to figure out what to talk about it, bringing in folks like Chris Kurbs and all to message it. You see what happened, right? Take those 2 examples.
I'm sorry, this was not planned, but you know, I feel like a big differentiator in that aspect is who's paying for it. And if you've got someone else paying for it, i.e. insurance, and it covers those things, it's a serious advantage, isn't it?
I mean, it is, right?
Bankrupting the insurance companies, but
See, a lot of people look at cyber insurance as a mitigating factor. It is not.
No.
It is a risk transfer function. All you're doing is you're transferring your risk and a marginal transfer. Today, if you look at 3 years ago, insurers were willing to write towers, right? JP Morgan had $1 billion tower. And if you look at University of California, which is a very good example, there are 2 breaches. Nobody would touch them with a 10,000-foot pole. Lloyd's of London was the only one that's willing to take risk. You all know, right? Twin Towers, Lloyd's of London. They take risk. That's why they're Lloyd's of London. Today, even in the US, Lloyd's is the only one that's willing to take massive risk. Every other insurer, even AIG, is very careful underwriting, and they're limiting it for a very double-digit number. They're not even willing to write a $100 million policy, and they want a tower for that. I mean, when you talk about general liability, people were willing to write billions of dollars, but cyber, they're limiting to no more than 100 million. 100 million for a single breach wouldn't cover anything.
Well, and that's on the high risk exposure. So, there is cyber coverage available for those companies,
Small businesses
that aren't engaging in cyber espionage and counter cyber terrorism. But yes, you're absolutely right. But interestingly, you mentioned risk transfer, and fortunately, with cyber, there's that opportunity. It's normally a moral hazard, but you get indemnified plus those costs associated with using that as an opportunity to really build back better.
Absolutely.
Which
I mean,
is in
100%.
other products is not available for sure.
For every CISO, you should have cyber insurance. Small, big, or large, right? I mean,
That's not a paid endorsement, but thank you. Yes.
No, I mean, you didn't pay me for that, but I would love to get paid every single time I say you should buy cyber insurance.
Yeah.
But it's one of the tools every CISO looks at today, right? I mean, whether you come from the public sector, private sector, I mean, a lot of states, cities, and higher education today buy cyber insurance just as a coverage element.
I have to wonder if there's a way that insurance can compel an organization to do the right thing. Because if you don't have good hygiene in terms of cyber, and you purchase insurance, what's to say that the insurance company is saying, well, you weren't securing your network, so I'm not going to pay out? Where's that balance there?
So we're getting that actually. That's an interesting thing.
Cause and
Carlos.
effect.
Like 2 years ago, they were at 40% margins. Now with ransomware being hit, like left, right, center, the margins are coming down, and they're starting to look at, well, show me your hygiene now. What was your last vulnerability scan report? And if it's full bright red, okay, you said you have a continuous vulnerability management program, and here it shows you have persistent vulnerabilities. Well, ding, I'm going to deny your claim. I don't have to even argue anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, just one report will show you you're not compliant.
Yeah, that's the surplus lines. We don't get into insurance, obviously, too much, but if the application becomes part of the actual policy, right, that's the differentiator. But we have 10 minutes left. Do we want to do questions at this point? Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, okay, so we got at least 2 questions, so I'm going to open up the rest of the time for questions. Yes?
Hi, Ashok from Indina. I wanted to ask, what is the government's perspective towards cybersecurity tools? Is it agnostic? Because we do a good chunk of vulnerability assessment work for about 15 federal agencies. By the way, I still want to get NIH as a customer. But the question is, we frequently talk about, let's buy this software company that provides all these scanners and whatnot. And we say, well, how do we know this is the best of breed? The technology itself is evolving. The envelope is moving forward so fast that you buy a company and its half-life is only about 3 years. So, but how does the government look at it? How does the government ensure that it's getting the best of breed products and technologies and solutions at all times? Does it see itself wedded to particular companies, or does it want like best of breed at all times and would rather keep its options open?
I think there are 2 parts to that. Number one is, and I'm certainly not speaking for the entire government, but just from my program area, for us, our approach is to look at, we actually conduct bake-offs. So let's take malware remediation, Symantec, Trend Micro, Cylance, et cetera. We do bake-offs, right? And we evaluate our purchase decisions periodically, typically every 3 years, right? So is the product still performing to our expectations in terms of specific outcomes, right? Is there something new in the marketplace that may supplant its capabilities that we can leverage from a business perspective to make us more efficient in how we apply cyber? The other aspect to that is organizational resources. Some organizations, some federal entities don't have or are not empowered to take that route, right? They're using legacy products because they might not have the finances or the budgets or et cetera. So for them, it's about how businesses can basically build a more risk management process around what they do have, right? So basically leveraging to, I guess, if you think about a spectrum, 100% of what they have, 100% all the time from business process and people perspective. Again, I'm fortunate, or NIH or my program, we get to evaluate and look at, what's best of breed. So in terms of approaching, NIH as an organization, we always entertain businesses, right? What do you have? What's in the marketplace? What can you do to help us to, whether it's reinventing business processes, whether it's retooling our existing tool sets, we are always looking to enhance how we approach cyber. So hopefully that answers your question.
Another route I've seen so I was in the Department of Defense, and another route that I have seen, if you're thinking about what are these tools that actually end up in the government's hands that might be helpful from a business strategy, is incubators or accelerators or VC funds for startups like InQtel, like the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, that's based out of the Pentagon in Silicon Valley. And their whole purpose, they all have slightly different functions, but essentially at the end of the day, their end goal is to either co-invest or co-develop with young companies who are sort of identifying a pain point that has military or defense applications or intelligence community applications and might also have commercial applications. And those government entities invest or put resources towards those companies and then sort of help them out on their startup's journey. And if you were thinking about looking at companies at that stage, I would be looking for ones that are also working alongside maybe one of those entities.
Great feedback. Got one more time for one more question. Yes.
Okay, this is Mark Abrams from Harmonia. So we talked about a lot of tools that are deployed for cyber, so a lot of data is collected. And so I'm curious about something that's been used in the commercial domain, but I haven't seen a lot of reference or very little in the federal domain, which is extended detection and response, or XDR, to kind of integrate. So I'm curious if you could talk about, just briefly say whether those are methods that, is in the horizon for federal use. Thank you.
I can take the question. So, again, right, XDR, MDR, these are great fancy terms, right? It's an evolution from a SIM, from log collection to a SIM to now we want to get to an endpoint. Now the endpoint is breaking to the cloud and to your extended perimeter. So when you look at the federal government today, while the government is actually talking about it and there are lots of services that are being offered, right? And CrowdStrike is a perfect example. They started with a very small install base within the government. Today, if you look at the M&A of what CrowdStrike is doing, they're constantly extending their install base to go offer the XDR to their existing solutions. And then look at Palo Alto, turn around and look at what Demistio did. And they're trying to come in and take down a lot of Splunk install base and really offer their extended thing to the Cortex, right? Splunk, now Phantom was a little behind on what they had to do, and Splunk is coming back and doing it. So the government is actually investing quite a bit. So what they're also doing is a lot of these federal contractors actually have managed SOCs, and they're being entrusted with an XDR, MDR solutions. So they're using best of the breed of the solution sets, and some federal contractors spun out companies like Fidelis, right? They tried to do it within the government. It did not work well. They spun it out to do the commercial side. You see some incubated in the government, for the government, not working out, getting out, because VCs don't support that anymore. The commercial guys were very successful with the financial institutions trying to bring that to the government. So there's a lot of cross-infiltration happening back and forth. So when you look at emerging technologies, government is always a little shy to jump up and adopt them. You'll always see at least I would say 18 months to 36 months in adoption cycle, because they want to make sure, first you have to go through an ATO, right? That's a big hurdle. You have to go through compliance requirements. And a lot of commercial vendors are not willing to jump in till they prove it out. So you always see the investment dollars going in both ways. So, I mean, Valley is the best breeding ground, right? Like Mollie talked about DI/UX. So if you take a look at one of the reasons, I mean, it's Secretary Carter, I mean, not Carter, I mean, the Army's secretary, he's the one who actually started DI/UX. Raj Shah was the head of that. I mean, Raj was, a traditional NSA F-16 pilot, came to the Valley with Palo Alto, started this whole concept of bridging the Beltway to the Valley. Now you're starting to see a lot of young cybersecurity companies trying to work with one of the big Beltway companies to offer them as a service. The tech is built in the Valley, the service is actually offered here. So XDR is in that very emerging state today.
A lot of alpha. All right, well, I think our time is up. I do want to thank each of my prestigious panel members, and I also want to thank Thai DC for putting together an amazing event. We joined about 2-3 weeks ago, and it was, between then and now, the amount of effort in terms of logistics put together to have this event and execute it wonderfully. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.